The first time I realized something was off was at a place called Sup Dogs on Franklin Street, and I remember it because I was holding a receipt for $87 and my hands were shaking a little, and nobody at the table was looking at me. I came to Chapel Hill in August of 2021. I'm not American. I won't say where I'm from because there are only so many of us in that program, and it would narrow things down. My English was good on paper, less good in practice, and I spent the first 2 weeks trying not to say too much in case I said something wrong. UNC had put me in a suite on South Campus, 4 bedrooms sharing a common area, and I remember unpacking my suitcase and smelling that particular smell American dorms have, which is carpet shampoo and something like plastic wrapping. My suite mates were Maddie, Kira, and a girl everyone called Peach because of a tattoo on her ankle. They were loud in a way I was not used to, but not mean loud, just American loud. And when Maddie knocked on my door the first night and said, "We're getting food, come with," I went with them without thinking about it. That first dinner I paid for myself. That part matters. We went to a bagel place near campus, and I paid for my own bagel and my own coffee, and I remember thinking, okay, this is fine, I can do this, I have friends already. The second night we went out again. This time it was a group, 6 or 7 of us, boys from down the hall too, and we ended up at a burger place on Franklin. When the check came, Maddie said, "Do you mind putting it on your card?" Venmo's being weird on my phone, and she said it so lightly that saying no would have been the strange thing. So I put it on my card. It was $140. Everyone said thank you and made a lot of noise about paying me back, and I said no problem, no problem, and I walked back to the dorm feeling good about it like I had done something friendly. Nobody paid me back that week. When I checked Venmo, I had one payment from a guy named Cole for $8, which I think was for a coffee I had gotten him a completely different day. Nothing from Maddie, nothing from Peach, nothing from Kira. I didn't say anything about it. Where I'm from, you don't bring up money at the table. You wait. And I kept thinking, they're students, they're busy, midterms are starting, they'll get to it. By the end of September, there was a rhythm. If the group went out, I paid. Not every single time. Sometimes Tanner, the boy across the hall, paid for pizza on a Sunday. But if it was a real dinner, a real bar, a real Uber, the card that came out was mine. And every time it was the same thing. Venmo me later. I'll get you next time. Once Peach said, "You're literally saving my life right now. I owe you so hard." And everybody laughed and I laughed too because I didn't know what else to do. I started keeping a note on my phone. Not because I planned to confront anyone. I just wanted to see the number. By October 11th, the number was $642. My parents were paying for a lot of this. Not the fun, the actual life, the rent, and the meal plan, and the books. My father works for a company that does something with shipping containers, and my mother teaches, and the exchange rate was not kind that year. $642 was a real amount of money in my family. It was a plane ticket home in an emergency. The night of October 15th, I decided I would say something. Not angry, just to bring it up. There was a party at a house off Rosemary Street, and before we left, in the common area of the suite, I said, kind of into the room, "Hey guys, if we get food later, can somebody else grab it? I'm running low this month." Maddie was doing her eyeliner in the mirror by the door. She said, "Yeah, of course," without looking at me. Peach said, "Oh my god, obviously." Kira was on her phone. We got to the party. Around 11 o'clock, a group of us walked to a place on Franklin that was still open. Tanner ordered mozzarella sticks and 2 baskets of fries and 4 sodas, and when the woman at the counter said the total, everyone kind of drifted toward the napkins and the ketchup pump, and Maddie turned to me and said, "You got this? I'll Venmo you when we get back, I swear." I said no. I said it quietly. I said, "I actually can't tonight, sorry." And I remember the woman at the counter watching us, holding the card reader, and I remember Maddie's face going through about 3 expressions in 1 second before it landed on a small, tight smile. She said, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And she opened her own wallet and she paid, and she did not look at me for the rest of the night. That was the first shift. The next morning, nobody knocked on my door, which sounds like nothing, but for 2 months, somebody had knocked on my door every morning, usually Peach, sometimes Maddie, asking if I wanted to walk to class or grab coffee at Alpine. That morning, the suite was quiet. I could hear them in the common room. I could hear Maddie laughing. I sat on my bed with my shoes on and my backpack on my lap for I don't know how long. And then I went out and said good morning, and Peach said good morning back, and nobody moved to leave with me. I told myself I was being paranoid. I walked to class alone. It was one of those Chapel Hill October mornings where the air smells like wet leaves and cafeteria bacon at the same time, and the sky was that specific North Carolina blue, and I remember thinking, this is such a beautiful place, and I felt very far from anyone in the world. Over the next week, it got worse in the way these things get worse, which is that nothing dramatic happened. There was no fight, No one said anything cruel. It's just that the group closed. When I sat down in the common room, they finished their conversation and drifted to Maddie's room. When I asked what they were doing that night, Kira said, "Not sure yet," while looking at a plan that was clearly already made on her screen. On a Thursday, I heard them leave the suite around 9, and I heard Peach in the hallway say, "Shh," and then the door of the suite closed. I want to be honest about how I felt because I think this is the part people don't talk about. I was not angry. I was embarrassed. I felt like I had done something wrong. I kept going over the conversation at the counter, wondering if I had said it too flatly, if my English had come out ruder than I meant. I actually thought about apologizing. I thought about knocking on Maddie's door and saying sorry for the other night, and offering to pay for something, just to fix it. I did not do that. I want to be clear that I did not do that, but I thought about it for 3 days, and that scared me more than anything else in the story. On the 23rd of October, I sat on my bed with my laptop, and I wrote my mother a long email. Not because I couldn't handle it. I already knew what was happening. I had known for a while. I just wanted to say it out loud to someone who knew me before all of this. I wrote about the receipts in the Venmo note, and the morning nobody knocked, and I wrote it plainly without crying, and I hit send at around 1 in the morning. She wrote back before I woke up. Her English is not great, so she wrote in our language. The email was 3 paragraphs long, and I don't remember most of it, but the last line was 1 sentence, and it said, translated, "These are not friends." I read it twice. I closed the laptop, I went and took a shower, and I stood under the water for a long time, and I did not cry, which surprised me. That week I went to the counseling center on campus, which I had walked past probably 50 times without thinking about it. The woman I saw was maybe 40, wore a cardigan, had a plant on her desk that was clearly plastic. I told her the story in about 10 minutes. I was worried it would sound small. She listened all the way through, and then she said, "That's not friendship. That's a transaction they wanted to keep one-sided." She said it in that flat American way, like she was reading a nutrition label, and somehow that made it easier to hear than anything my mother could have written. I want to say I confronted them. I didn't. I just stopped participating. I ate at the dining hall alone. I studied at the library on the top floor of Davis where nobody I knew ever went. I said hi in the common room and nothing more. Within about 2 weeks, it was like I had never lived there. Peach's boyfriend started staying over, and I could hear them through the wall, and I put in earplugs and slept fine. Second semester, I moved to a different suite. It wasn't dramatic. Housing let me switch because a girl on the other side of campus wanted my spot for reasons of her own. My new suite mates were a girl from Ohio who did crew, a girl from Charlotte who studied all the time, and a quiet Korean-American girl named Jenny who became eventually my actual friend. We split checks down to the dollar. Jenny once made me sit in a booth for 10 minutes while she figured out that I owed her $1.40 for a shared appetizer, and I remember laughing so hard I felt something loosen in my chest I hadn't known was tight. None of the girls from the first suite ever texted me. Not once. Not on my birthday, not at the end of the year, not when I saw Maddie in line at Alpine in April, and she looked right through me like she was reading a poster on the wall behind my head. I think people expect a story like this to end with something you learned. I didn't learn anything. I already knew. My mother knew from 3,000 miles away in one email. The woman with the plastic plant knew in 10 minutes. The only person who had needed convincing was me, and I wasn't convinced by anyone in particular. I just ran out of ways to explain it to myself. The receipts are still in a folder on my laptop. I don't look at them. I don't throw them out either. The first ring I found was a thin silver band with a scratched inside that read something like R&M 6/71. It came out of a bundle of bedding from the ortho floor, third shift laundry, sometime early January. I remember thinking it was probably a grandmother's. I set it in the small plastic tray we kept for lost items and filed the intake slip. And by the time I clocked out at 7, the ring was gone from the tray, which meant somebody upstairs had come down and matched it to a patient. Standard. That's how it's supposed to go. I worked overnights in the sub-basement laundry at a hospital off Beach Boulevard in Jacksonville. If you've never been in one of those rooms, imagine a school gym filled with industrial washers that hum at a frequency you feel in your teeth. Everything smells like bleach and warm cotton. In January, the floor by the dryers was still warm, but the outside air coming through the loading dock at 3 a.m. was cold enough that the trucks left ghosts of exhaust. Our job was simple on paper. Bagged linens came down a chute from every floor. We cut them open, pre-sorted for contamination, ran the loads, folded, wrapped, sent back up. What people don't realize is that patients leave things in their beds constantly. Reading glasses, dentures, cash tucked into pillowcases, wedding bands they took off for surgery and forgot about, a rosary once wrapped in a Kleenex. If you find something, you log it, tag it, and it goes upstairs to patient property. There's a whole office for it. In my first year, I found maybe 4 items total. Not much. enough to feel like the system worked. Then Ray started on our shift. He transferred in from housekeeping in December, wanted overnights for the differential pay, friendly guy, early 40s, tattoo of a fish on his forearm, always had a Yeti mug of black coffee he refilled at least 6 times a night. He'd been at the hospital longer than me, so I didn't have any reason to feel weird about him. He knew everybody. Security waved at him. The charge nurses on 5 joked with him when he went up for a bathroom break, because our bathroom flooded that month and we were using the one on the ward. The second ring showed up on a Tuesday. I was elbow deep in a bag from post-surgical when my glove caught on something hard. Class ring. Big blue stone, gold band, some Ohio high school from the 60s. I pulled it out, held it up, and Ray was already at my shoulder. "Damn," he said. "That's a nice one. I'll walk it up." "I've got it," I said. "I need to log it anyway." He shrugged and went back to his cart. I remember his face for maybe half a second longer than I should have. Not a look exactly, just a beat where his mouth did nothing. I filed the slip and put the ring in the tray. When I came back from lunch, the tray was empty, and the property log had a signature. Not his, not mine, a supervisor's. Everything by the book. It stayed with me the rest of the shift, though. I couldn't have said why. Third time was cash. 220s folded flat inside a pillowcase from oncology, the corner tucked under so tight you'd have missed it if you didn't work laundry. Ray was on that night too, working the folding table across from me. I said, out loud, "There's $40 in this pillowcase, that's crazy." He looked up and laughed and said, "Patients hide money all the time, they don't trust the nightstands." Which is true. He said he'd drop it at property on his stretch break since he was heading that way. I sealed it in an envelope and handed it over. Fourth thing was a watch, a cheap Timex but engraved on the back, Dad, 2004. It came out of a bag from the ICU floor, and I remember because I was already starting to keep a mental list. Ray had been in the bathroom when I opened that bag. He came back and asked what I'd found, and I told him nothing much. First time I lied to him. I don't know why I did it, I just felt like it. I brought the watch upstairs myself that night. Property office was locked at that hour, so you put items in a drop safe by the door. Slot on top, tamper-sealed envelope. Fine. On my way back down, I passed Ray in the stairwell going up. He said he was going to the vending machine on 2. There isn't a vending machine on 2. There's one on 1 and one on 4. But maybe he didn't know that. He didn't do rounds like the nurses did. He only went up to smoke on the loading dock roof. Maybe. Fifth item was a bracelet, thin gold chain, medical alert tag hanging off it, someone's name and a warning about warfarin. I almost missed it because it had gotten tangled in a fitted sheet. The tag pulled through the elastic. Ray was folding right next to me and he reached over before I even had it fully free. "I'll take that up," he said. "I've got it. You went up last time. It's fine. I need to stretch my legs." I let him. I don't know why. Something about the way he was standing over me, the way his hand was already open. I gave him the bracelet, and he put it in his front pocket, not the tray, and he said he'd log it before he went, and he walked out. I did nothing. That's the part that gets to me still, honestly. I stood there with my hands in a bag of sheets, and I did nothing. When he came back 40 minutes later, he said everything was squared away, and I nodded, and I went back to work. The next morning at home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that bracelet. I kept thinking about the way he put it in his pocket. I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be the person who accused a coworker and turned out to be wrong. I just wanted to see if I was crazy or not. 2 columns to start, then more. Date, shift, item, who found it, who took it up, what floor it came from, whether Ray was on shift, whether he'd been in or out of the room in the 10 minutes before or after. I went back through my memory as far as I trusted it. I put 5 entries in. 4 of the 5 were Ray shifts. Then I just started paying attention. 6th item was a hearing aid. Ray was off that night. I walked it up and logged it. No drama. 7th was a rosary, actual rosary, small wooden beads and a tin cross. Came out of a hospice floor bag on a Sunday night. Ray was on. I found it. He said, "I'll walk it." And this time I said no, and I walked it myself, and I logged it, and when I came back, he was standing at my station drinking his coffee, and he said, "You don't trust me with the drop safe, huh?" in a joking voice, and I laughed and said, "It's not that. I just needed the walk." Second time I lied to him. I updated the spreadsheet at 6 in the morning from my car in the parking lot. Over the 4 weeks I tracked, 7 items came through that should have gone to patient property. 5 of the 7 were on nights Ray worked. On the Ray shift items where he was the one who carried them up, my friend on days checked the property system for me, quietly, without asking why. Some were in there. Most weren't. I sat with that for a night. Then I wrote the email, I sent it to hospital security, not to my direct supervisor, because I didn't know who talked to who. I attached the spreadsheet. I wrote maybe 3 paragraphs. I said I might be wrong. I said I understood how serious this was. I asked if they could pull the hallway cameras between the laundry and the property office for the specific dates and times I'd listed. I sent it on a Wednesday morning. I didn't sleep that day either. They called me Thursday afternoon. 2 men from security and a woman from HR. They asked me to come in an hour early. They asked me to walk them through the spreadsheet in a small office with the door closed. They asked if I had said anything to anyone. I said no. They asked me not to say anything to anyone. They said thank you several times in a way that made me understand they already knew something before I sat down. Ray was on the schedule that night. He never showed up. I found out later, in pieces, that they had already pulled a week of footage before my email even arrived because someone in property had flagged that intake was down. The camera on the property office hallway showed him going up with items and turning into the stairwell instead of the office door 4 separate times. They searched his locker Thursday afternoon while he was at home sleeping before shift. They found a plastic grocery bag inside a duffel, rings, the Timex, the gold bracelet, the rosary, some things I hadn't logged because I'd never seen them. He was walked out by 2 officers when he showed up Friday for a meeting he thought was about scheduling. Charged with theft. I don't know what happened after the arraignment. He didn't come back to the building. Property tried to return everything. Most of it went home. The class ring went back to a man in Ohio who had been visiting his brother. The Timex went to a woman whose father had died on our ICU floor in December, and I heard she cried on the phone for a long time. 2 things didn't go back. A thin silver band, the very first one, the one with the scratched-in initials, and the medical alert bracelet with the warfarin warning. Both patients had been discharged weeks earlier. The hospital sent letters to their addresses on file. Nobody wrote back. Nobody called. They're still in a small envelope in the property office as far as I know. I asked once, a few months later, and the clerk checked her screen and said, "Yeah, unclaimed, still here." I finished my shift that night and drove home in the dark and made coffee I didn't drink. The tunnels under the loop stay hot all winter. That's the whole reason they exist. Steam from the plant runs out through insulated lines to hospitals, courthouses, a few of the older office towers, and a chunk of the university buildings on the south side. My job that December was to walk certain stretches every 3rd night and check for what the sensors couldn't. Small leaks, a drop in pressure, a section of lagging that had come loose off a pipe. Boring work, mostly. You do it alone because there's no room for 2 people to move around each other in half the corridors anyway. The night this happened, the city was under a wind chill advisory. The radio said -20 with the wind, -8 without. I remember because I sat in the truck for a minute before I went in, watching the numbers change on the dashboard while the heater ran. My coffee was already cold. I had the thermos wedged between the seats, and it had gone lukewarm somewhere on Wacker. I went in through the access point behind a service building near LaSalle. You take a set of stairs down 2 flights, then through a steel door with a keycard reader, and then you're in the tunnels proper. There's a smell down there that never leaves you. Wet mineral and hot iron. Old grease that's been baked and rebaked into everything. The pipes on the ceiling sweat and drip in places even though they're insulated, because the drip isn't from the pipes, it's from condensation on the concrete above. My route that night was the northeast branch, out toward the river. I know it well enough that I don't need the map. You start counting valves and you know where you are. The lamp on my helmet threw a white circle in front of me, and everything past 10 feet was black. The steam hissed at every joint, low and steady, like a room full of people whispering with their mouths closed. About 40 minutes in, I noticed the smell change. Not much. Just a note underneath the usual, something faintly sour. Human, in the way a locker room is human. I stopped and stood still. I figured maybe a dead rat somewhere in the lagging. That happens. They crawl in for warmth, and they cook. Then a little further on, I saw the wrapper. A silver bar wrapper, the kind of granola bar you buy at a gas station, sitting on the concrete floor next to a rail. It was clean, not old, not chewed on by anything. I looked at it for a long time before I picked it up. I kept going. The branch I was in has a service alcove maybe 30 yards past that spot. It's a wider section where 2 lines split, and the ceiling opens up a little, and there's a flat area against one wall where sometimes crews leave tools if they're coming back the next shift. My lamp swept across it and I stopped again. There were blankets. Not one. A stack of them, folded, the way you fold things when you plan to use them again. A backpack, 2 plastic gallon jugs of water, a cardboard flat that had been laid down like a floor mat, a camp stove, unlit, and a paperback with the cover creased back, sitting on top of the blankets like somebody had put it down and meant to come back to it. I stood there, and I could hear my own breathing over the steam. None of this was fresh. That was the thing. This wasn't somebody who ducked in last night. Somebody had been living here. Somebody had been eating here and sleeping here and reading here for a while. I looked at the paperback. It was a used copy of a Le Carré novel. There was a bookmark in it. I should say what I did next, because I've thought about it a lot. I could have turned around right there. I had the wrapper in my pocket. I had enough to write it up. Instead, I kept walking. I don't know exactly why. Some of it was the job. If there was a fire risk in my section, that was mine. Some of it was just that once you know somebody's down there with you, you want to see where they are. The corridor bent left, and I walked another 60 or 70 feet. The heat was heavier here because two big lines run parallel through that stretch, and the concrete holds the warmth. It was maybe 50 degrees. Coat weather, not tunnel weather. I turned my lamp down to the low setting so it wouldn't blind anyone. They were sitting in a second alcove, further in. 5 of them. An older man with a gray beard, wrapped in what looked like a moving blanket. A younger guy, maybe 30, in a Bears hoodie that was too big for him. A woman with her hair in a knit hat pulled down almost to her eyes. Another woman, older, next to her, holding a thermos in both hands. And a kid, not a small child, more like a teenager, 16 or 17, hood up, staring at the concrete between his feet. Nobody yelled, nobody moved fast. The younger guy in the hoodie stood up slow, with his hands where I could see them, like he'd done it before somewhere else in his life. The older man lifted one hand off his blanket. He didn't raise it high, just up, palm out, the way you calm a dog. "We'll leave," he said. His voice was rough, but even. "Just give us until morning. It's 20 below out there." I didn't say anything for a second. I could hear the stove ticking, even though it wasn't on, just the metal contracting or expanding from something. The kid didn't look up. The woman with the thermos was watching my hands, not my face. I asked how long they'd been down here. The older man said, "Since Tuesday." It was Friday night, Saturday morning technically, by the time I was standing there. I asked if anyone was hurt. He said no. I asked if anyone had a fever, because that was the winter it was, and he said no again, and I believed him because I don't know why, but I did. I looked at the camp stove and asked if they'd been running it. He said only outside, at the grate up by the alley, never in the tunnel. I could tell he wanted me to know that. He wanted me to know they weren't stupid about it. I stood there for what felt like a while, probably 20 seconds. The steam kept hissing behind me. My radio was on my belt, and I was aware of it in a way I hadn't been all night. "Until 6, I said. "I need you out by 6. The older man nodded. He didn't thank me. That was the part that stayed with me, actually. He didn't thank me. He just nodded once, like we'd agreed on something businesslike, and he lowered his hand back onto the blanket. The younger guy sat down again. The kid finally looked up at me, and then looked back down. I walked out the way I came. I didn't rush and I didn't dawdle. I finished the rest of my route because if I skipped a section, I'd have to lie about it in my log, and I wasn't ready to lie about more than one thing that night. Back in the truck, I sat with the heater running for a long time. My gloves smelled like the tunnel. I called the outreach line that works with the shelters on the west side, the one that runs a van overnight. I told the woman who picked up that I had a location where people had been staying warm, that they needed a real place, that there was a kid with them. I gave her the cross streets for the alley grate, not the tunnel access. I asked if she could have somebody there at 6 with food and a list of open beds. She said she could. She asked how I knew. I said I worked down there and I'd talked to them. She didn't push. Then I sat there another minute and I wrote my incident report on the tablet. The protocol is clear. Any unauthorized presence in the utility corridors has to be reported the same shift. Photos, if safe to take. Location, number of individuals, condition of the site. I did all of it. I logged the alcove. I logged the blankets and the stove and the water. I wrote that I had observed 5 individuals and that I had informed them they needed to vacate. All of that was true. The only part that wasn't quite true was the time. I put the discovery down as an hour and a half later than it happened. Early morning, right before end of shift. By the time anyone from the utility went down to check, and by the time any officer showed up to walk the corridor, it would be after 6, and I already knew what they'd find. I turned the truck around and drove back to the yard. The wind was blowing hard across Congress and the salt trucks were out. I clocked out at 5:52. I never went back down that branch on shift. I asked to be rotated to the south lines the next week and my supervisor didn't ask why. When the follow-up came a few days later, it said the site had been found empty. A stove, some blankets, a paperback, no individuals present. Case closed on our end, kicked over to the city. I still have the granola bar wrapper. I don't know why I kept it. It sits in a drawer in my kitchen with a bunch of receipts and dead batteries. Sometimes I open that drawer for something else and I see the corner of it and I think about how the older man's hand came up off the blanket and how he didn't thank me. That was probably the right call on his part. Neither of us owed the other anything more than what we did. Thanks for spending some time with these creepy stories. Drop your favorite one in the comments because I'm curious which story you guys liked most. And while you're there, don't forget to browse the other vids on the channel. See you very soon. Bye.